Okay, looks like we are in. Hi everybody, welcome to today's session of UPSC Buffet by Gallant IAS. Today we'll be discussing about 2021 modern history portions. So of late, there has been a trend, at a slight deviation from the usual trend where modern history used to be a very core area where multiple questions, up to 10 questions used to be asked. But with every year, starting from 2021, 22, 23, the number of questions have been reduced. But modern history still remains a core area of our studies because we have got applications in mains as well. So it's not an area that you should be neglecting, and you can easily master this area with with a structured approach. And I'll tell you a few things based on these questions. So let's get started. So in the first question is, in the first quarter of 17th century, in which one of the following was where the factories of East India Company located? And we have to choose between these three options. The timeline that is given, especially when you are solving any modern history question, it's very important to note the timeline. Whether it's first quarter, first half or late half of any century. So that's very important. First quarter of 17th century meaning that 1600s. From 1600 to 1625. So that's the rough timeline of the first quarter of 17th century. So that's the timeline we are looking for, and we know that British arrived in 1600s only. So in first quarter meaning that they are only starting to set up their bases in India. Having that idea really helps in solving this question. Also, one more thing you need to be knowing is where exactly these places are. Okay, Broch, it's the medieval or the previous name for Bharuch, and Chikakot is Srikakulam, Tiruchirappalli is Tiruchirappalli. And if you know the places and their locations, Srikakulam and Tiruchirappalli, they are in Andhra Pradesh. That's one thing we can know. And Bharuch is in Gujarat. So where did the British set up their initial bases? First, they set up in Surat. So they approached from the western coast and they started setting up bases in Surat. Then they moved on to the eastern coast. So that's the basic idea. And since it's very peculiar, the question they have been asking is first quarter of 17th century. So we have to be looking at areas that are in the western coast. So this is one way you can easily decipher this question and arrive at the answer. But only thing you need to be knowing is the actual location of these places. But if you have gone through the modern history at least once, you will be able to connect these places. So this from this we can imagine that Srikakulam or Chikakol is in the eastern coast, Andhra Pradesh, Tiruchirappalli is also in the eastern coast. We can easily eliminate these two because this is the beginning of settlement of British in India, and they were mostly focused on the western coast, starting from Surat, then Bharuch, and then other places in Gujarat, then slowly moving to the eastern coast. So we can eliminate 2 and 3 based on that, and we can arrive at the answer very easily as A. Okay, this is the fairly easiest logic, and you can easily apply that in any other question. And one more thing, though the modern history has been reduced, the questions from the arrival of European powers has increased. So we can expect more questions from this particular portion, the arrival of European powers or colonial powers. That area still remains important. 1 to 2 questions every year is still being continued. So that's the reason why I have purposefully taken this question, and we'll be discussing some facts about that. Also, one more thing, everybody should be knowing about how their initial approaches were. For example, Portuguese was they were the first to arrive in the Indian subcontinent, first colonial power to have an actual base and trade system with India, the modern one. Okay, so this is important. The basic about any colonial power. In this context, it's about Portuguese, who was the one who did the first military conquest. Then what was the major senders, and then what was their governors or the first emissaries. That is important. In this context, we are discussing about the Portuguese only. So Albuquerque is the one who captured Goa from Bijapur. That's how Goa became the base of Portuguese in whole of Asia. So then Dutch East India Company was established in 1602 and had Masulipatanam as its main center. So we should be knowing Dutch is another colonial power, the current day Netherlands. So they have their base in Masulipatanam or Machilipatnam. and it was later replaced by Nagapattinam. This is also another fact. And first governor of Portuguese was Francis de Almeida. Almeida has introduced the blue water policy and things like that. So if you are learning, like when you are learning about these colonial powers and their arrival, you need to be knowing about who was the first one to reach, as in which power was first to reach, and who was the person, people associated with that. Then first military conquest, first settlement, things like that are important for any colonial power. Okay, not just Portuguese, any colonial power. Remember the names like Francis de Almeida and Albuquerque. Okay, so all three is right in this Gallant test question. So that's one thing. We'll take some time to learn about how these bases were set up and the kind of order in which these colonial powers arrived in India. Starting with Portuguese. The first thing to note about Portuguese is that they were the first to arrive and last to leave. We know that Goa was, even after independence, Goa remained as a Portuguese territory, and it was later captured through a military action. So Portuguese was the first to arrive in 1503 in Cochin, and then they were the last to leave. So that's one thing to remember. And the French and Danish, Danish is one important thing. They were the last to arrive and first to leave. Okay, that's another thing about them. So that's a common pattern you can observe. And major bases of Portuguese, you can imagine. Like even now we can associate with the Portuguese where their cultures are still relevant, like in parts of Kochi, Goa, and Gujarat, etc. We have their cultural remnants very much evident. So Portuguese, it's relatively much easier to remember their spheres of influence. So that's about Portuguese. Then Dutch. Dutch has got its bases Masulipatanam, Pulicat and Nagapattinam. So they were not coming from the western coast. They didn't approach India through the western coast. They approached to the eastern coast. That's one thing to remember. But British, they started at Surat, then Bharuch, then Madras, then Bombay, and then moved on to the eastern coast, Srikakulam. Also, they have eventually reached the West Bengal, Kolkata fort. Then French also had, their base in Surat, Pondicherry. Still, it has got the remnants of French architecture and everything. Mahi, yes, and Chandanagar in West Bengal, yes. French also had their bases in Tiruchirappalli. Yeah, Tiruchirappalli is in Tamil Nadu. Yes, sorry, I said Andhra Pradesh. It's in Tamil Nadu. Trangabar, it's also in Tamil Nadu, and then Serampur. It's in West Bengal. This is about Tranquebar and Serampur connected with Danish. So that's all about it. Just learn about this arrival, and basic timeline is all that needed. You don't have to go to the exact details or the numbers. Just remember the order in which they arrived. First Portuguese, then Dutch, then British, then French, then Danish. And the first to leave was, first to arrive and last to leave was Portuguese. So that's the basic idea. And for this question, you can easily use the logic and arrive at the answer. Moving on. This question is actually, even if you don't know anything factual, if you have learned the modern history in a way that you have qualitatively assessed and analyzed the topics, you can easily arrive at the answer. In the context of colonial India, Shahnawaz Khan, Prem Kumar Sehgal and Gurbakh Singh Dhillon are remembered as. Okay. Assuming you don't know anything about them, okay, who they are or whatever they are. But from their names, what we can decipher, their religious affiliation we can decipher, meaning that this Shahnawaz Khan most likely will be a Muslim, and Prem Kumar Sehgal will be a Hindu, Gurbakh Singh Dhillon will be a Sikh. The movements in which Sikh and Muslim participation were much higher or much concentrated were the ones in the Punjab region or the Punjab region, and along with movements like Ghadar Party and INA. That is the key thing to remember, because INA, Ghadar Party and the Punjab movements, they had the combination of Muslim as well as Sikh leaders. That combination is not all that prominent across the other movements. If you connect it to the Bengal movement, Bengal area, there won't be any Sikh leaders there. But the combination of Sikh leaders as well as Muslim leaders along with Hindu leaders is a characteristic trait of Ghadar Party and INA. So if you come across such combination of names, most likely that will be from INA or Ghadar Party. Okay. So in this option, we don't have any Ghadar Party, and the only thing we have is INA, and that's how we arrive at the answer. See, having a qualitative assessment about how the sections of people have participated in the movements really helps you in eliminating the options. This is not an easy thing to remember because you won't be able to remember everybody's name, everything, and this was completely off random. We don't usually learn about INA. We learn about INA trials, but other than that, we don't usually delve deep into that. And this is how you can develop a logic in modern history and arrive at the answer. Such qualitative assessments can go a long way. And this trend is very much evident in the 2022-23, where we can actually use similar logic to arrive at the answer. I hope this is very clear. The reason why INA becomes the answer is because not because I knew who all are these, but because I knew these people's religious affiliation and the kind of social structure they came from, and the movement which had similar social structure. So that's about it. Sikh and Muslim leaders coming together will be a characteristic trait of Ghadar party and INA. So that's how I arrive at this answer. And let's take some time to learn about these things, because since UPSC have asked about leaders of Swadeshi and boycott movement, it's a large topic, but members of interim government we need to be knowing, because next time UPSC will be asking something about that. So let's be prepared for that. Like I always say, the questions that UPSC have already asked and the options given are the guiding lights for our expected questions. So we should be learning something about members of interim government, then members of drafting committee, and some officers of Indian National Army. So starting with Indian National Army, Subhash Chandra Bose, of course we know, he is the supreme commander, and he is the key figure in INA. But he is not the one who started the INA, it was Mohan Singh. So that's one thing to remember. And then Muhammad Zaman Kiani, it was a major general and commanding fighting units in Burma front. Then Shahnawaz Khan, Prem Kumar Sehgal, then the names we have already discussed, Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon. So apart from Shahnawaz Khan, Prem Kumar Sehgal, Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon, we have Muhammad Zaman Kiani. Okay, and all of these, Shahnawaz Khan, Prem Kumar Sehgal, and Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon were all INA trials accused. Okay, so that's the significance of this question, but even without that you can actually arrive at the answer. Then members of interim government, it's very important. If you know that we formed an interim government in 1946, and we had certain portfolios, and this portfolio was shared between Congress and Muslim League as well. So they had representative from Congress as well as Muslim League. And the Jawaharlal Nehru was the Vice President of Executive Council, External Affairs and Commonwealth Relations. So that was the portfolio held by Jawaharlal Nehru. And Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel held the portfolios of Home, Information, Broadcasting. Rajendra Prasad, Food and Agriculture. John Mathai, Finance. Jagjeevan Ram led with Labour, and Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, Education. Asaf Ali was given the portfolio of Railways. Then C.H. Baba, Works, Mine and Power. Then Liaquat Ali Khan, Finance, and Sardar Baldev Singh, Defence. Okay, these are the prominent members of the interim government in 1946. So remember these names: Sardar Baldev Singh, Jagjeevan Ram, John Mathai, Asaf Ali, C.H. Baba. These names are important because if their names are given, what's the common trait between them, or they are all associated with what? If some question comes like that, you should be able to answer it as they were the members of interim government. Okay, because these are the names that we don't usually hear. So remember that. Then the famous members of drafting committee. It is not that difficult. We will be learning this in polity as well as history. So we have got a double revision going on. So this is not that difficult, but still it's worth remembering that. B.R. Ambedkar, we all know that he was chairman of the drafting committee. Then Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer was an eminent jurist and major contributor. Then K.M. Munshi, key draftsman. He was a constitutional expert, and there has been a conflict going on whether or not to recognize K.M. Munshi as the actual father of the Indian Constitution or not. Things like that. They're all controversial stuff. We don't have to go into that. But he's a key figure. We need to be knowing that. Then Gopalswamy Iyengar, Muhammad Saadullah, represented minority and provincial interest, B.L. Mittar, and then D.P. Khaitan. Okay, so names like B.L. Mittar, D.P. Khaitan, Muhammad Saadullah. This is something we can miss because other names we have heard about. So if UPSC gives these names, and we might be slightly lost. So don't make that mistake. Learn it right now. That's about it. And this question doesn't require any not much factual knowledge. Having this logic or this approach can easily get you the answer, but still I've taken the effort to point out the members of all of these options. So you will be better equipped for anything that comes from this particular question. Moving on. According to the Portuguese writer Nunes, the women in Vijayanagara Empire were expert in which of the following areas? Okay. Again, a qualitative assessment of Vijayanagara Empire is required. What is your perception of Vijayanagara Empire? We know that it was relatively progressive as well as a prosperous state, and having a prosperous and a progressive state meaning that women will be having a higher order of social participation compared to a regressive state, compared to the states of Bijapur or some places like that. Vijayanagara is much progressive, much advanced, as well as they were prosperous also. So in such a scenario, what all could be the usual areas where women could be experts, or women participation in general is the question. So in accounting, can't they be participating? Of course. Soothsaying, they can be. Astrology also, they can be participating. Wrestling is one thing that we something that we find it slightly challenging. But here is the progressive aspect and the prosperous aspect of Vijayanagara Empire, should be taken into account, because if this was about any other areas or any other empire during that time, we won't be that sure. But Vijayanagara, due to its core nature of having a very progressive and highly egalitarian society, we can say that women will also be having a participation in somewhat a male-dominated domain of wrestling. So this is also worth considering, and very good chance this would be right only. So things about Vijayanagara Empire, you can actually have a qualitative assessment. Imagine you studying everything about Vijayanagara Empire and missing this, and you don't know the qualitative assessment of Vijayanagara Empire. Then there is a good chance that you might be missing on wrestling. You might think that there is very little chance that women in that era will be participating in wrestling. So qualitative assessment is very, very important as the factual studies. So whenever you are studying about any empire, any movement, any personality, make a qualitative assessment. Try to create a picture of how that society will be, whether it be progressive and the role of women, everything. The egalitarian, whether it's egalitarian or oligarchic or authoritarian, things like that. So such a thing is what UPSC is testing here. UPSC is not testing your knowledge with this question. I'm 100% sure that UPSC is not testing whether you have read about Nunes' account or anything. UPSC is expecting you to understand whether you have captured the essence of Vijayanagara Empire. So we can easily arrive at the answer as D. Such an approach is very much required, not when you are solving questions, but when you are studying. So that's why I'm telling you, because slowly you will be starting with the prelims. So when you are studying these portions, make a qualitative assessment, meaning that you have to create a mental picture based on certain qualities, not just facts. Facts are needed, but qualities are equally important, and create a mental picture of everything that you are studying, not just in history, but it's most applicable in history. Okay, because history has got a lot of facts going on, and it's not easy to remember all that fact. So generating an essence like a picture in your mind can help you solve much of the questions. So you cannot learn everything about Vijayanagara Empire, but you can create an impression on what kind of an empire Vijayanagara would be, and any question that comes, you can solve it based on that. So that's about it. Answer is D. And then with reference to Madanapalli, okay, I attempted this question and I got it wrong actually, because this is not something, I didn't know this question and I got it wrong also, because my logic didn't work. But it doesn't matter, because in the questions above, and at least in the first 3 questions, I was able to work my logic very well. So it's fine even if my logic fails in 1 or 2 questions. So I'm again telling you, logic is not foolproof. It's not 100%. It can go wrong, but it doesn't matter if it goes wrong. You have to look at the strike rate. How many questions attended? How many got right? And net result should be positive. That's the core idea. So from the name itself, Madanapalli, it's from Andhra, it's also given as Andhra Pradesh. So obvious thing would be, okay, I thought like Pingali Venkaya, the name is Andhra, like it's an Andhra name. So I thought this would be the one, because I didn't know the factual thing. Okay, and I knew that tricolor flag was designed somewhere in Andhra Pradesh also, not exactly remembering the place. So I thought this was the thing UPSC was asking, and I marked this question because I knew this was not the thing because headquarters of Theosophical Society was first in New York and it was later moved to Adayar. So I was able to eliminate this. But other than that, it was like I couldn't connect Rabindranath Tagore with Madanapalli and Patavi Siddharamaiah. Maybe a good chance. The name itself says that he is from Andhra, and I thought this might be wrong, right also. But I was more inclined towards choosing this because this has got a very significance and the kind of question UPSC is usually asking is aligning with this. But this was a wrong thing. So this question was very factual and logic did fail in this question, and I purposefully taken this question and admitted to you that logic failed to say that despite having that logic failing, I was able to get most of the questions right, and that's what matters. Even if your logic fails in one or two questions, it doesn't matter because logic can fail in a question which is very factual. It's fine. At the end of the day, it's all about the net result. Attending 10 questions, getting your logic wrong in 3 and getting it right in 7 is what we are looking at. Okay, we cannot get 100% accuracy with logic. So we are targeting for anything upwards to a 70%, and that's more than enough to clear this examination. The answer surprisingly is Rabindranath Tagore translated the national anthem from Bengali to English here. I absolutely had no clue, and I was genuinely surprised seeing at that answer because I didn't know that. Like those who have known this, it's not a big deal for them, but for somebody like me, it was a big thing because I couldn't absolutely connect it. And this happens. It's fine. It's not gonna stop your chances from clearing prelims. You can definitely clear your prelims with logic, and mistakes like these are perfectly fine. And again, I'm telling you, I would still attempt questions like these. I wouldn't shy away because if I could connect Pingali Venkaya, the Andhra name, and something as significant as Indian national flag, and if I can slightly remember that it was in Andhra Pradesh, but Pingali Venkaya designed it in Andhra Pradesh, I would again go for this sort of approach. I'm not saying that I would choose the same answer, but I'm saying that I would still stick to my logic because I am more than sure that in questions like this there is a good chance that my logic will work. Okay, and it has already worked in 3 questions, so it's fine. So this is the answer, and let's learn few facts about it. In 1919, Tagore stayed at Theosophical College in Madanapalli. So in Madanapalli, Theosophical Society has got a college, and he translated Janagana Mana in 1919, staying there in Madanapalli. Okay, that's the significance. Then Pingali Venkaya, tricolor flag in Vijayawada. It's not in Madanapalli, it's in Vijayawada. And headquarters of Theosophical Society. This everybody will be knowing. Colonel Olcott and Madam Blavatsky, they started it in New York and then later moved to Adayar in Madras. Theosophical Society has got a lot of offices, colleges across India, even in mostly in South India, but they have got offices across India. Moving on, this was an absolute bouncer for everybody because back then some current affair relevance was regarding Saint Francis Xavier, but this was completely a bouncer for most of them, most of the aspirants, including myself. But my attempts were low and I had to attempt this question. Otherwise, I would have skipped this because this seems extremely factual. At first, I thought it was extremely factual, but then since my attempts were low, I started reading this question. So it was like Saint Francis Xavier was one of the founding members of Jesuit order. This seems like a very possible thing because Saint Francis Xavier is somebody is very important, and I've been to Goa and I've seen that there is a church dedicated to him. So to having a church dedicated to a saint and somebody like Saint Francis Xavier, he should be something somebody of a very high stature, like a founding member of Jesuit order. That's a very good chance of happening. So I thought this would be right because Saint Francis Xavier is not just another priest. He is somebody of very high stature, and he could be somebody, a founding member of Jesuit order. That seems very likely. Saint Francis Xavier died in Goa, and a church is dedicated to him here. This is slightly tricky because I knew that Saint Francis has a church there, and a church is dedicated to him, and his mortal remains are also kept in that church. So this is slightly tricky because factually this seemed right, but the issue was I am not 100% sure whether or not he died in Goa. That fact is missing. But the only thing is that I've gone to this church. I think most of you who have gone to Goa have gone to this church because it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and this thing is like this is the particular fact I am doubting. I try to connect it because being such a famous or somebody was of higher that much of order, there is a less chance of being, they might have come to Goa and they might be, going on a mission back home or something of that sort. There is very less chance of them dying in Goa because very less number of saints or those who have arrived in India have actually died in India, because most of them came at an earlier stage and they would have gone back to their bases in the papal states in Italy or someplace else, because I haven't heard about any priest or any saint who has died in India, because that's a very significant thing. If they have died in India, it's a very significant thing, and having their church here, it's also, with their mortal remains, it's also a very significant thing. So if such a significant thing is there, we should be knowing. So this is something I was skeptical about. So I thought, okay, let's wait and go through the other statement. The feast of Saint Francis Xavier is celebrated in Goa each year. This is right only. Obviously, in every place where there is, there any saint that is associated with, there will be a feast associated with them. That's normal only. And Saint Francis Xavier being somebody of this much of stature, obviously they will be having something. So 1 and 3 is definitely right. So I was left with 1 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3. And this died in Goa, I was little skeptical, because having a church, it's fine, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he would have died in Goa. He would have died, I think, going back to his base in Italy, the papal state, or someplace else. So this was one thing I was skeptical about, because having a saint like Francis Xavier dying in India means it's a significant thing, and we would have known about it. So I thought of, that's not the answer, and I just eliminated it and arrived at the answer as C. This was slightly skeptical for me. Having a church is there, but died in Goa is one thing I was slightly skeptical about. So that's how I arrived at the answer as C. Then after this question, I was quite curious. I wanted to know if at all any famous saints that arrived in India, any missionary that arrived in India, died in India. That question clicked in me, because that's something that worth knowing. And then I came across the name of Saint Thomas the Apostle, the one who actually, one of the 12 disciples of, one of the 12 apostles of Jesus, meaning that he was the chosen 12 ones by the Jesus himself, and he was sent to India, and particularly he entered the Kerala coast and started spreading Christianity here. And he actually died in Chennai. That's one one revelation for me, because I didn't expect such a personality like an apostle of Jesus, having his tomb or being martyred in India is something that was slightly a new information, a surprising information for me. So it's worth knowing. Saint Thomas is we can say that he is the one who laid the foundation of Christianity in India. Very unlike the Portuguese or the colonial way of spreading Christianity, the Saint Thomas the Apostle, the Christianity actually arrived in Indian subcontinent in 72 CE, right from the time of Jesus itself, and that's why the Christians in Kerala are they trace their lineage straight to the Jesus himself. So that's a whole different story, because the missionary activities or anything at a later colonial stage was not the reason why states like Kerala has got a significant Christian population or a Muslim population, because the location of the Kerala coast as well as the connectivity with the rest of the world and Middle East actually connected them with the religious exchanges. The Muslims and the Christians in the Kerala or Kerala, they trace their origin back to the back to the prophet as well as the Jesus. So that's a anomaly considering the rest of the India, because Islam or Christianity didn't arrive in the Kerala region not because of the colonial or other conquest or anything. It came strictly from the trade exchanges and the connectivity that the state had with the rest of the world, starting in the 1st century itself. So that's very important to note. And Saint Thomas the Apostle is a very important figure in Christianity, because he is one of the 12 apostles of Jesus, meaning that Jesus has chosen 12 of his most capable disciples to spread Christianity, spread the idea of Christianity across the world. And St. Thomas was given the assignment of Asia, and he traveled to Kerala coast, and then he traveled across the South India, and later martyred in South India, as in Chennai. And there is a church named to church dedicated to him called St. Thomas Cathedral Basilica in Chennai. This is worth knowing. And St. Francis Xavier came almost 1500 years later. He actually came to India in 1552, like along with the time of Portuguese, and he was a missionary, and he was actually trying to enter China for missionary work, and fell ill and died on that island. So he didn't die in Italy or anybody. He actually died in China itself. But his mortal remains are kept in Bom Jesus Basilica in Goa. Okay, and the reason why his mortal remains are kept there is because China didn't allow foreign missionaries, and Goa was under Portuguese control, so it was safe and symbolic. And keeping somebody as important as Saint Francis Xavier helped Goa, or helped the spread of Christianity in Asia, and it also gave the symbolic power to the Portuguese. So that's the basic thing. Remember this figure. Saint Thomas is a very important figure because this establishes the ancient connection between the Kerala coast with the Middle East, and that's very significant in your understanding, as well as understanding about our heritage, culture, etc. Moving on, the Montagu Chelmsford reforms of 1990 recommended granting voting rights to all women above the age of 21. Right off the bat, if you knew anything about the voting rights, the trend of history of voting rights in India, you know that people have got universal adherence or non-cooperation movement, then civil disobedience movement, then Quit India movement, and independence. These are the core events. Okay, study these core events as key pillars. First, study them. Associated personality, events, what happened, response of British, and the final settlement. Then try to fill in all the events that happened in between. As in, after the Swadeshi movement and before the non-cooperation movement, we had the 1909 Indian Council Act or Minto-Morley reforms. Then after again we had this Montagu Chelmsford reform. Then in 1935 we had Government of India Act of 1935. Then post or after the CDM we had Quit India Mission and just before that we had Cripps Mission, and before that August Offer, things like that. So you have to have a key pillars, then fill in these pillars with other information. This way your timeline will be very structured, and any question that comes from connecting these areas you can easily answer. Don't study history as a standalone topic. That is the most detrimental way to study history, because you will be spending more time than required and getting much less information than is needed. So don't make that mistake. Study history as key pillars of events, then fill in with other events, then work it layer by layer. And that way you can easily study it and remember everything. Okay, because if I have learned this 1919 Act and if I have tried to remember it, this would be like I won't be easily able to eliminate it. I would have spent much more time. But I knew that it was only until 1950 we had universal adult franchise. So this is straight away a wrong answer. I don't have to think much. Again, Government of India Act. This, with every act that is going on from 1909, 1990, 1935, voting rights or the status of voting right was increased. Eventually, women were also added to that. But again, maximum of, if I remember correctly, of 12 to 13% of the population were getting, having the voting rights by 1935. Almost 86% of the population didn't have voting rights. So let's take some time to assess the nature of voting rights, the history of the voting rights from 1900s. So in 1900s, nobody could vote, obviously. Strict British rule, no voting, only nomination. In 1909 Act, elite minorities, could vote. Elite minorities, as in not about minorities, they are minority when compared to the whole population. That's it. Means elites only, okay? Don't focus on this minority part. Elites, meaning that those who had property, education, things like that, they could vote. The reason why British gave the voting rights for them is to, give more legitimacy to their role, because they think that those who are educated and elite, they will obviously be voting for British or British interest, and they can say that, okay, we are a democratic state with election and all going on, we are not an oppressive colony, things like that. It doesn't fit Indian interest anyways, it fits British interest. So it was very restricted. Then in 1919, wider elite. The population, like the core elite structure was slightly diluted, and more elites with, earlier it was maybe millionaires. Then it came, those who had lesser than that, but more than the usual population. And that's about it. In 1935 is when 14%, like the highest proportion was achieved in 1935. Like I said, like I thought 14%. There's limited mass voting. Okay, in 1915 only we had all adults above 21 having universal adult franchise. It was in 1950 with the enactment of constitution and India being a republic, we had this 21 universal adult franchise in India. And one thing to remember is, in the Indian subcontinent, if I remember correctly, in 1921 Sri Lanka had a universal adult franchise. Sri Lanka is one of the first countries to have a universal adult franchise. Okay, remember that. It was in 1921 if I remember correctly. So remember the name of Sri Lanka. It was one of the first countries to have universal adult franchise. Moving on. With reference to 8th August 1942 Indian history, which one of the following statement is correct? Again, a strict timeline is being asked, but elimination is possible. Okay. At first when I saw this question, I was like, okay, 1942 quit India, but then I saw Cripps. Okay, I was like, okay, here we go, we are stuck. But luckily I was able to eliminate it, because Quit India resolution was adopted by AICC. Quit India resolution, I knew it was in 1942. I don't exactly remember the date or month, but it was in 1942. Viceroy's Executive Council was expanded to include more Indians. This is something that happened way back, because in 1909 Act, the Viceroy's Executive Council was expanded, and with every subsequent act, it was gradually expanded. So this happened way earlier. Congress ministries resigned in 7 provinces, and why did they do that? Because India joined the Second World War without the permission of Indians. The British actually pulled India into the Second World War without India's permission. So they resigned Congress resigned in 7 provinces. So that's happened, and it's in 1939. So that's gone. Cripps proposed an Indian Union with full dominion status once Second World War was over. Cripps mission, it was also in 1942. So 2 things are in 1942, statement A and statement B. And like I said, I've studied this based on action and reaction way, and like I said, I have studied Quit India, then I filled in Cripps, etc. So I knew the timeline between Quit India and Cripps. That is, Quit India was a response to failed Cripps mission, meaning that the proposition of Cripps was like, we will be given full dominion status. We were promised the dominion status in the First World War, and we didn't get that. And they are proposing the dominion status in the Second World War almost 20 years later. And this was like an absolute humiliating proposal from their end. And there is no way our leaders are going to accept that. So this was an absolute disaster of a proposal. And the response for this was Quit India resolution. So I knew this happened first, then Quit India happened. And one more thing, Cripps mission actually entered India at an earlier stage. As in 1942, they were not, in early 1942, like the year they were entering, or the process started in early ages, like in the months of March, April or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but it was earlier than that. But August is almost halfway down the 1942 year, meaning that this is the only fact I knew, that Cripps mission it happened much earlier in the year 1942, like in the earlier months. And August is not an early month, it's almost past the half. And I was like, okay, there is a good chance that Cripps was proposed in the earlier months, and absolute humiliation of that ended in AICC accepting the Quit India resolution. So this is how I chose the answer as A, because I knew this happened first and this happened second, and there is a good chance that this might have happened at an earlier stage and this happened at a later stage in 1942, later month. So that's how I arrived at the answer as Quit India resolution. So August 8, Quit India Day. Okay, remember that. Who among the following is associated with Songs from the Prison, a translation of ancient Indian religious lyrics in English? We can actually approach this answer without knowing any factual things. Somebody who is associated with translation of ancient Indian religious lyrics. So who could be that? One person we can eliminate right away. That would be Jawaharlal Nehru. He's a rationalist, and not that he is not religious, but he is mostly rationalist, and there is a very less chance of him translating ancient Indian religious lyrics, especially in when he is in present. There is very less chance of that happening. Bal Gangadhar Tilak is also somebody who can do that. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi is also somebody who can do that. Sarojini Naidu is also somebody who can do that, but we haven't heard about any accounts of her being imprisoned and writing from the jail. So we have to eliminate these two. And then among Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, going by the name, songs from the prison, the things that generally Bal Lal Pal, these extremist leaders write, they will be having something powerful, or the kind of names they will be choosing will be much more powerful, like Maratha or something of that sort, not songs from the prison, which is slightly euphemistic way of presenting things, and very positive, euphemistic, down to earth sort of naming presentation. It all comes from somebody who is having that nature, and that is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. So that's how I arrived at the answer. I didn't know that, but I qualitatively assessed it between A and C, that is Gal Gangadhar Tilak and Karamchand Gandhi, like Gandhiji, and I was like, there is less chance of Bal Gangadhar Tilak writing something like songs from the prison. He will be giving it a name, something more powerful, much more Sanatani, rather than something like songs from prison. There is a good chance it will be somebody like Gandhi, who is very down to earth and whose philosophy is very much euphemistic. So that's the basic idea. Then moving on, who among the following was associated as secretary with Hindu Female School, which later came to be known as Bethune Female School? We can actually arrive at the answer very easily. Bethune Female School had got, Devendranath Tagore is not associated with that. Okay, he was not somebody who was, this Bethune Female School is mostly associated with mission, like Western form of education, Western values, women freedom, etc. And somebody who is associated with that in the Bengal region will most likely be, somebody from the Bengal region. Bethune Female School is in Bengal, so somebody from Bengal region who is having Western ideals, who has an affinity to Western ideals and women right. We need to be choosing that. Annie Besant is not active in the Western, like in the Bengal region, so that is gone. Sarojini Naidu is also not one. And then Devendranath Tagore is active in the Bengal region, and he has a slight affinity to Western region, but he's strictly, associated. He's more of a revivalist rather than a revisionist. Like he's more of a revivalist rather than a revisionist. So there is a less chance of him being one. And Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, I knew that he's very much in line with his Western ideals, and he's advocated for human rights, women education, child marriage, focusing against child marriage, etc. So he is a very good candidate for something like this. So I chose Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and he's a very important personality when it comes to women education and freedom of women. We could place him in line with Jyotiba Phule, etc. Jyotiba Phule in the Bombay region, and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar in the Bengal region. So let's learn something about him and look at this Gallant test. This has rightly put very good information about Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. He was a renowned Sanskrit scholar and principal of Sanskrit College in 1851. See, he was a Sanskrit scholar, but he has got its affinity to the Western form of education, Western values. But he's not entirely Westernized, or he's not submissive to the Western ideals. He knew that some values in the Western world are good, and he wanted that to be implemented in India. But he believed in self-autonomy, our heritage. So that's the best kind of blend we need to be having. Exactly what Gandhi and other leaders had. We had our own heritage and everything, but not everything is good about our culture. Like with any culture, not everything is good. We need to be adapting better progressive values from other cultures to make us a modern society. That's how a society develops, becomes civilized, and progress. That's the basic idea Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar also had, and that is a very mature thought process, and he had that. And then he played a crucial role in establishing first Indian school for girls, Bethune School. The question we already did. Then Vidyasagar's effort led to the passing of Widow Remarriage Act. Yes. And he was a strong advocate against child marriage and polygamy. Yes. Very good. And he was also associated with that. He founded the newspaper Shom Prakash and Varna Parichay. Okay, that's also his work, and all four are right. So these are the basic idea or basic works of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. I have made a table so that you can understand his line of work. Okay, with it's better to make a table or an understanding, qualitative understanding about any personality, whether it be the very famous ones like Gandhiji, Jawaharlal Nehru, Motilal Nehru, or Sardar Patel, or Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai. Try to make a qualitative assessment of them, like the kind of values they had, whether they were strictly religious, or they were critical of their religious stuff, or they were advocating of religious reforms, or if they were advocating of religious reform, what sort of reforms, the scale of that, things like that, and their affinity to Western values, things like that are very important. Okay, having a qualitative assessment really helps. And also the timeline, because Ishchandra Vidyasagar, he was active in the 19th century, so he died I think much earlier than the modern era of freedom struggle in 1900 started. So he died in 1891. So he was associated with widow remarriage and anti-child marriage, then women education, Bethune school, education, Sanskrit college reforms, then his language was modern Bengali prose, Varna Parichoy. Then values are rationalism, compassion, humanitarianism, just like we have already discussed. Moving on, this is a slightly difficult question to solve, this one, but we can somehow manage it, but there is a good chance that we will be stuck at a 50-50, because one statement is strictly very factual. Okay, with reference to Indian history, which one of the following statements are correct? Okay, Nizamat of Arcot of Nizam, if you remember about Ambur biryani, that's a delicacy in Nizamat of Arcot, and it emerged out of Hyderabad state. Hyderabad had got Nizams, so we might easily connect it with Hyderabad and Nizamat of Arcot, but they were both associated with Mughals only. So it is not emerging out of Hyderabad state, but it was emerging out of the Mughal state only. So that's the basic idea, and that is gone. Then Mysore kingdom emerged out of Vijayanagara Empire. This is true. Mysore kingdom initially was a vassal state to Vijayanagara Empire, and it was under the rule of Vodayars. And later Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, they took charge of this Mysore kingdom and made it a modern military state. And after the defeat of Tipu Sultan, it was handed back to Vodayars, and it was kept as a puppet state under British. So this is true. One is wrong. So 2 is right. So we have left with 2 and 3. This is slightly difficult because Rohilkhand was formed out of territories occupied by Ahmad Shah Durrani. Rohilkhand is a region that is occupied by Afghan people, Afghan forces, and Ahmad Shah Durrani is also an Afghan from the name of it. So this is slightly difficult, but the fact that this is a factual thing, so I don't mind if you skip this question, because I actually didn't attend this question because it seemed very tricky. The third one especially seemed very tricky, very factual. So the only thing I could decipher was Rohilkhand is Afghan, it was occupied by Afghan forces, and Ahmad Shah Durrani seems like an Afghan ruler. But I am not 100% sure about that. So I actually didn't want to take a risk out of this, because even the first statement I was slightly having a doubt. So I skipped this question in reality, and it's fine even if you skip. But the fact is, this was not formed out of Ahmad Shah Durrani. Okay, that's the one thing you should be remembering. That is, Kingdom of Rohilkhand was Afghan settlement and Mughal witness. Okay, it was not founded by Ahmad Shah Durrani. It was by Ali Muhammad Khan. The question UPSC have dropped this question is not because they want you to study everything. This is like a distraction. Seeing this question, and you started looking into the medieval history or these kingdoms, because we have got like umpteen kingdoms to study, and if you put your effort into studying all of that, you will be easily channeling your energy into the wrong places. So don't go behind all of these questions come, even if they come, you can easily skip them or take a risk, but it doesn't really make or break your game. Okay, so take cues from the PYQs, learn something from PYQ, that is, learn Rohilkhand or some learn about Rohilkhand, Vijayanagara, Nizamat of Arcot. That's it. Don't go beyond that. Don't go beyond and learn each and every kingdom that there is. It's not going to reward you well. At most, you are going to get 1, 2, or even 0 questions. So don't take that risk. Anyways, since we are at this option, we'll obviously be learning about that. Nizamat of Arcot, mainly because of Mughal decline and autonomy under Nizam. Kingdom of Mysore, fall of Vijayanagara and Vodayars. So that's all about it. And this is one thing from our Gallant test. This is also important because question about Tipu Sultan could come. Given the controversy surrounding the history of Tipu Sultan and a lot of things are happening, a question about Tipu Sultan could come. So it's worth knowing something about him. This is a question from our Gallant test, very well put together. So it very well crystallizes the kind of ideology and the kind of economic outlook of Tipu Sultan. So Tipu Sultan introduced a new system of coinage and new scale of weights and measures in Mysore. This is true. Yeah. Tipu Sultan restricted the local merchants to trade with the British but sent emissaries to France, Burma to develop foreign trade. Yeah, that is also right. Then Mysore state controlled the profitable trade of Malabar coast and Tipu Sultan encouraged the export of sandalwood, cardamom and pepper from the ports. See, he didn't encourage export of these things because export of these things benefited the colonial powers, especially the British. He was fighting the British, so he discouraged it. He tried to sabotage it. So Malabar, that's one reason why he tried to capture the Malabar coast, because he wanted to cut off the supply of these high value exports through Malabar coast that benefited the British. So this is not the thing he did. He actually discouraged and tried to sabotage it. Then the British fought 4 wars with Mysore and finally defeated Tipu Sultan, after which the state was given to supportive Wadaya rulers. Yeah, the Wadaya ruler back then was a child. I think, if I remember correctly, he was a child king, and he was ascended to throne and made a puppet ruler after the death of Tipu Sultan. So this is true, and only 3. The third statement is wrong. So this is the basic idea about Tipu Sultan. See, he have introduced a new system of coinage. Within a span of few years, under Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, the Mysore kingdom has emerged as a modern military and as well as a economic state, because with the introduction of new coinage, new scale, and the connections with the French, especially their values as well as the technology transfer, everything actually transformed Mysore kingdom into something that the growth that was seen was unprecedented. Before the Wadayas, it was just like a normal kingdom going under a normal pace of development. But under their role, like Tipu Sultan and Hyder Ali, due to their influences and their connections with the Western world, especially the French, they actually incorporated a lot of progressive ideas, practices into their administration. So that's one thing to remember. Tree of Liberty, you might have heard about it, things like that. And Tipu Sultan was also a member of Jacobean Club in French Revolution. Think about that. So that's about it, and that's all about modern history. So in the upcoming days, we will be continuing with the 2022 and the rest of the modern history portions, and we will be discussing topics in detail. So stay tuned and see you soon. Study well, like I said, learn these questions in a way that this history in a way that you structure it based on key pillars. Fill up the events in between, then make a whole qualitative pictures, and that's it. Don't try to go behind each and every fact, otherwise it gets very heavy, and it's not the fact that gets you the questions right, it's your understanding about that topic and the way you have internalized it. So that's all about it. Thank you.